Hey guys, welcome back to Pre-IB Bio. We're going to continue on with our notes in Unit 4, Biochemistry, otherwise known as Molecular Biology. So today's lesson we're going to do in a couple of different parts because it's kind of big. So for part 1, our enduring understandings are that all living things are composed of 4 basic categories of macromolecules and share the same basic needs for life. So it doesn't matter if you're bacteria, if you're a person, if you're a fungus, if you're a plant, you are built out of the same 4 types of molecules. And this unit is about learning all about those molecules. The unique chemicals properties of carbon and water make life on Earth possible. Right. So last lesson was all about how water makes life on Earth possible. Today we're going to focus on carbon and the different molecules that carbon makes up. Our essential questions. Number 1, what is the role of carbon in living organisms? Number 2, what types of molecules are in the body? Number 3, how are macromolecules formed? And we'll really get more into that in the second part of the lesson. How are macromolecules broken down? Same thing, that's more of a part 2. And there are some specific objectives that you should be able to understand or do while you're thinking about these questions. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain how carbon bonds with other elements and itself to form organic compounds. You should be able to explain why carbon can form single, double, and triple bonds. You should be able to identify 4 types of macromolecules. I'll give you a hint, it's these 4 that we're going to talk about up here. And you should be able to explain hydrolysis and condensation reactions in macromolecules. And again, that's more of our part 2. So, we're going to start talking about organic molecules. Get your notes page ready. You need today's date, Unit 4, Macromolecules Part 1. Make sure your name and block are on there. And our first essential question, what is the role of carbon in living organisms? So, when we talk about organic molecules, we're not talking about like Whole Foods or like Sprouts organic whole food markets, like Greenwise. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like the scientific terminology organic, not like frou-frou branding. So organic means, well, first off, carbon is the building block of all organic molecules. So if a molecule is not built around carbon, it's not organic. There are 4 major categories, and you're going to hear this repeated throughout the entire unit. The first one we're going to talk about is carbohydrates, and we're going to spend the whole second part of today talking about carbohydrates. But then in later lessons, we're going to learn about lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids as well. So, in order for something to be organic, it has to be produced by living things. So, if it's not produced by a living thing, it's not organic. So, when you hear about like organic food production not having pesticides or fertilizers, that's actually not true. You can use pesticides and fertilizers if they're produced by other living things. And just a word to the wise, just because something is organic does not mean it's safe. So all the toxins and poisons that are produced by all kinds of animals around the world, they're organic. They're produced by living things. That doesn't mean they're safe. So organic means produced by living things, and it contains carbon. Without carbon, you don't have organic molecules. And this is because carbon is unique. So let's go back and talk about middle school science for a little bit. We're going to talk about protons and electrons and the periodic table, but only for a couple minutes. So carbon has 6 protons, right? And 6 electrons. Its atomic number is 6. It also has 6 neutrons, and when you add 6 protons plus 6 neutrons, you get a mass of 12, right? Yes, this is all coming back to you. So here in our nucleus, we have 6 protons and 6 neutrons, right? And we know that we have 6 electrons, but they don't go in the nucleus. They go on these outer shells. The first shell of our carbon atom has 2 electrons, right? 1 and 2. Now our second ring must have the other 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now our inner ring is stable because the inner ring can only hold 2 and it's full. But our outer ring is unstable. Our outer ring always wants to hold 8 electrons, always. But it doesn't have 8, it only has 4. So that means carbon, when it's by itself, is unstable. It wants to form chemical bonds with other atoms to satisfy this outside ring. That means carbon can bond up to 4 times with other atoms, which means it makes a really useful centerpiece that you can build off of, because you can build in 4 different directions. So when carbon finds other atoms, it bonds with those atoms and it borrows those electrons to satisfy that outer ring. Now, something you should remember, and it took me a long time before this really sunk in when I was learning all this stuff. When we're talking about a chemical bond, all it is stored energy. So anytime you're creating a bond, you're storing energy. Anytime you're breaking a bond, you're releasing energy. So a good way to think about a bond, I used to think about it as like shoelaces that tied stuff together, but that's not really it. It's like a little zap of electricity that holds 2 things together. That's a better analogy because all chemical bonds are stored energy. So let's take a look at methane. Methane is an organic compound. It's produced by living things. When you produce methane, or your dog produces methane, it smells pretty gross. It's usually a fart. Burps, too. Burps can be methane. In fact, methane is a pretty potent greenhouse gas. It's one of the most potent greenhouse gases. And a lot of the methane that's released that's contributing to global warming has to do with sheep and cow burps and farts. So, yeah, there you go. That's organic. So, here we have 2 molecules. We have carbon and we have hydrogen. And we already talked about how carbon by itself isn't stable, right? Because it doesn't have 8 electrons on that outer shell. Well, hydrogen only has 1 on the inner shell, and the inner shell wants 2, right? So that means neither of these are stable. So nope, carbon's not stable. It needs 4 more electrons. And hydrogen's not stable either. It only needs 1 more electron. So what do atoms do when they're not stable or when they're unstable? They bond to form molecules. Remember, an atom is singular, molecule is multiple. So here we have our carbon, and it's going to bond 4 times. This is methane. Now, that hydrogen and the carbon are sharing. They're both satisfied. That's stable. These guys are sharing. Stable. These guys are sharing. That's stable. And these guys are sharing, making them both stable. So now methane is a stable molecule. The carbon is satisfied. It has 8 electrons, and each of the hydrogens are stable because they are sharing electrons, so they each have 2 in their outer ring as well. So everybody's happy. Now, this is kind of complicated to draw. So when we typically draw molecules, we don't spend the time doing all this because that's just a pain in the butt. So we draw dot diagrams instead. They look like this, right? So here's our carbon in the middle, and then here we have our 4 hydrogens around the outside. So this right here is the same thing as this. It's just a lot easier to draw. One dash represents 2 electrons. So you can still tell in this diagram if this is a stable molecule by counting the number of dashes. 1 dash equals 2 electrons. So here's carbon. And remember, carbon wants 8 electrons on its outer shell. So let's count. 2, 4, 6, 8. This is a stable molecule. One dash, 2 electrons. So this is another kind of dot diagram that shows you where all the electrons are. Again, super complicated. So we just do that. Again, this is a stable molecule because everybody's outer shells are satisfied. See? 2, 4, 6, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. Same thing. I can do the same thing by counting the dashes over here. This dash equals 2 electrons. 2, 4, 6, 8. This is a stable molecule. One dash equals 2 electrons. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some molecules written with dot diagrams and dash diagrams. And remember, carbon creates 4 bonds to be stable. So here's our methane molecule again, and we know that that's stable, right? And it's only got single bonds, 2, 4, 6, 8, 8 electrons. That's fine. How many electrons? We already said that. Okay, here's isooctane. Now, do not panic. Don't panic. I know it looks big and it's scary, but it's not. We're going to go through and we're going to figure out how many electrons are around each carbon and figure out if they're stable. Okay, so let's do it together. 2, 4, 6, 8. That carbon is stable. Let's look at this carbon. 2, 4, 6, 8. That carbon's stable. Let's look up here. 2, 4, 6, 8. That one's stable too. 2, 4, 6, 8. Looks good. 2, 4, 6, 8. Totally stable. 2, 4, 6, 8. That one's stable. Look at here. 2, 4, 6, 8. Yep. 2, 4, 6, 8. Totally stable. Check it out. That molecule is totally stable. Now, when you first looked at it, it probably looked big and scary, but it's not. All you have to do is just count the dashes. That is a very complex carbon-based molecule, and it's also stable. How many electrons? Yeah, we just did that. Okay, now you're going to see molecules that have double bonds. Well, don't panic. Double bonds are just like single bonds, right? Each line is worth 2 electrons. So let's make sure that this molecule is stable. So let's take our first carbon right here, right? We have 2, 4, 6, 8 because there's 2 lines here, right? So this guy is satisfied. Let's do the one over here. 2, 4, and because there's 2 lines there, 6, 8. Double bonds, right? One bond. Well, actually, it's right here, right? So 1 dash equals 2 electrons. So that means that 2 dashes equals 4 electrons. And if you were wondering, yeah, that's a stable butadiene, butadiene. It is a stable molecule, right? Triple bonds. Same thing. So here we have a carbon molecule. It's got 1 bond over here with a hydrogen, and then it's got, so 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Let's look at this one. 2, 4, 6, 8. So 3 dashes equals 6 electrons. And that's a stable molecule. How many electrons? 2, 4, 6, 8. Got it. Now, here we come to ring structures, and carbohydrates are big with ring structures, so we're going to see lots of ring structures. Again, don't panic. All you're doing is counting, right? So now we have single and double bonds. Let's make sure that this is a stable molecule. So let's start with our bottom carbon. So here's our bottom carbon, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that one's good. Let's look at this one, 2, 4, 6, 8. See, 2, 4, 6, 8. There we go. That one's good. Let's look at this one. 2, 4, 6, 8. That one's good. 2, 4, 6, 8. That one's good. 2, 4, 6, 8. That one's good. 2, 4, 6, 8. There we go. This is a stable molecule. In fact, carbon rings are some of the most stable structures on the planet. When you talk about diamonds, some of the strongest stuff on Earth, it's formed from a series of carbon rings because that structure is very, very, very sturdy. All right, so as a review, carbon needs 8 electrons to be stable, and it can form single, double, and triple bonds to satisfy getting 8 electrons in that outer shell. And that's why carbon is the backbone of all living things on our planet, because it's so versatile. It can create so many different shapes and so many different things because it can bond 4 different times. Oh, yeah, we just did that. Okay. So I know that doesn't seem like it was the answer to essential question number 1, but it will as we continue going along. The role of carbon is to be the backbone of macromolecules, right? And those macromolecules build life. So let's move on to essential question number 2. What types of molecules are in the body? Remember, carbon is the thing that builds these, and these build you. So now you're going to create this table on your paper. Okay. Now, I would like you to add the elements CHO, CHO, CHON, CHONP. You're not going to hear me lecture about them today. Well, some of it you will, but this will make more sense as the unit continues. This is commonly known as CHO, CHON, CHOMP, and that's a way to help you identify the type of macromolecule. So we'll refer to this throughout our lessons. You're not going to hear me talk a whole lot about it today, but make sure you write it down because it's going to be important. When you go back and look at your notes, it's going to be really helpful, okay? So right now you're creating this table. If you need to pause the video, go ahead. Okay, so here's that table, right? Again, we're talking about organic molecules. And we said before that carbon is the building block of organic molecules, and carbon is unique. The second level is not full, that makes it unstable, and it'll bond up to 4 times. Now, here's a new word, monomer. Monomer is a simple building block, right? And a monomer is the building block that builds bigger molecules. You're going to hear this word a lot. Mono means one, right? So monomer means one molecule. These are small carbon-based molecules because they're organic. The first category that we're going to talk about are carbohydrates. The monomers of carbohydrates, my bad. Not this lesson, but in future lessons, we're going to talk about lipids, we're going to talk about proteins, and we're going to talk about nucleic acids. These are the 4 categories of the 4 categories of macromolecules that build you. So here is one monomer, right? You put lots of monomers together, and that creates a polymer. Polymer are larger chains of monomers. Poly means many, right? So a polymer is many molecules. If you want to draw yourself a picture of a monomer and a polymer, it's not a bad idea. Each of these different categories have different types of monomers and different types of polymers. And we're going to spend a lot of time in this unit talking about those different types. These are considered complex carbon molecules. No longer are they small. Now they are complex because you're putting a bunch of them together. So, let's take a look at some examples. Carbohydrates are actually sugars and starches. Lipids are fats, oils, and waxes. And you guys know what proteins are. And you may not know what nucleic acids are, but that's okay. The monomer of carbohydrates is a monosaccharide. Mono meaning one, and saccharide means sugar. So if you put more than one monosaccharide together, you get polysaccharides. Sometimes you get a disaccharide. Di means 2. Or you get polysaccharides. Remember, poly means many. So a polysaccharide is many sugars. Poly means many. And saccharide means sugars. Now, before we go nitty-gritty detailed into carbohydrates, let's talk about the monomers and polymers of these other categories, just to introduce them. So, when we're talking about lipids, these are fats, oils, and waxes. The monomers are glycerol and fatty acids. The glycerol, it looks like a ping pong ball, sort of, or a flattened ping pong ball. And the fatty acids are long tails. Now, phospholipids have two tails, and triglycerides, tri meaning three, have three tails. And we'll talk all about that when we talk about lipids. We have a whole lesson dedicated to lipids. But for now, what you should know is, I think I spelled that wrong. I think that, yeah, it's GLYCER. So it's GLY, glycerol and fatty acids. So glycerol and fatty acids are the monomers of lipids. For proteins, your monomer is an amino acid. If you put lots of amino acids together, you get a polypeptide. When you put polypeptides together, you get a protein. So the monomer of proteins are amino acids. Put amino acids together and you get polypeptides. Put polypeptides together and you get proteins. And then the last one that we're going to introduce right now, are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. The monomers are nucleotides. Put nucleotides together, and you get a nucleic acid, like DNA or RNA. Now, I don't expect you to memorize this right now, right? What we're doing is we're just introducing the concept that there are four major categories of organic molecules that build living things. Those are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Each of these categories is built up from smaller molecules. So the monomers of each are different. The monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. If you put monosaccharides together, you get polysaccharides. The monomers, or the building blocks of lipids, are glycerol and fatty acids. If you put them together, you get lipids like phospholipids or triglycerides. The monomer of proteins are amino acids. If you put amino acids together, you create polypeptides. When you put a bunch of polypeptides together, you get a protein. The monomer of nucleic acids are nucleotides. When you put nucleotides together, you get DNA or RNA. Now, we're going to spend independent lessons on each one of these categories and go in detail as to how they're built, how you break them down, and what they're used for. But for now, just understand that these are the four major categories, these are the building blocks, and these are what you make when you put those building blocks together. Remember, this is all possible because carbon is looking to create four bonds with other molecules to satisfy that outer ring. So you kind of owe your life to valence electrons right now. Because if carbon didn't have this like half-empty shell on the outside, you wouldn't exist. Okay, time for a practice quiz. Go ahead and answer these questions, and then take a picture of your notes and upload them, and I'll see you in a few minutes.